There's a whole host of pollinating insects that are pretty abundant in the dunes and really pretty obvious to the observer, especially if you stop and wait quietly and look for very small movements at the top of bushes and draw your eye to things that are flowering, because pollinators are obviously always going to be attracted to plants in flower. You might be lucky enough to catch a glimpse of a blue-banded bee, which is probably one of my favourite native bees, and they're pretty easy to spot in the dunes, not just because they have beautiful blue and black stripes on their abdomen, but they're a fairly large, slow bee, and they tend to almost hover as they feed on nectar because they're a bee that has to really vibrate the plant that they're feeding on. And if you watch them very closely, you'll notice that they're a vibrating pollinator, so they have to pause for a moment at each flower and vibrate it quite vigorously in order to pollinate the plant. There are some other native bees that are pretty easy to spot in the dunes, cuckoo bees for example, and lots of different hoverflies. They look like something like a cross between a wasp and a bee. You could be forgiven for thinking that they're either of those things, but if you watch them, you'll notice that they stop at each flower and they literally do hover really quickly, and then they stop and then they move on, and then they stop and then they move on, and they're very static in their movements, and I think they're really interesting to watch.